Okay, let's go live. All right. Hey, everybody. How's it going? Thank you for watching the Hot Zone. Uh, and for those of you that just came over from the CBN live I just finished, thank you for watching over there too. Trying to get lives done on both as much as I can, but man, just don't have a lot of time as I'm doing these packages every day and trying to go collect more news and everything. So anyway, it turns out there are a lot of things that are blowing up in Iran, like almost on a daily basis. Something is just spontaneously combusting across Iran. And I, I made a little video compilation of some of the things that have happened. And so I want to walk you through some of those if I can find it here. Um, let's see, where did I put it? Okay, here we go. I put it in studio mode. Okay, I think this might be it. Yeah, here it is. So this is at the port at Bandar Abbas, uh, and this started before the war, right? And this was a absolutely massive explosion. They say 70 people likely died in this explosion. Absolutely horrific. As it turns out, what exploded was some explosive material that was being stored at this port, really against regulations. I mean, you should not be storing stuff like that at a port. That it was a precursor for jet uh, rocket fuel for Iran's um, program making missiles. And it had been purchased from China and transported to Bandar Abbas, and it was being stored there at Bandar Abbas. Very highly volatile stuff. And man, somebody just got too close with a cigarette or something, and it went kablooey. Just so you remember that, that was the first one that sort of kicked all this off, right? But since the war has ended, there have been a lot more of these things. So here's another one just from a couple days ago. This is in Tehran, big apartment complex that caught fire. That's pretty exciting right there. And get some other close-ups of it here in a second. So this is in the city of Qom, an apartment building blew up. A couple other apartment buildings. There's a gigantic explosion. Look at the lightning coming out of the top of that thing. That's insane. Here's another apartment that blew up. Now, Iran is saying that this is mostly um, like gas leaks, accidents, things like that. This is outside of Tehran, a military base that something large went up in smoke. And we can go on and on with all this, but I mean, you can see here, it's just, like I say, almost a daily occurrence now that things are just going kablooey in Iran. And they make Iran has been saying, oh, gas leak, you know, accident, whatever. But it's gotten to the point where it's kind of ridiculous. Like nobody can have that many gas leaks. Oh, and by the way, this stuff is starting to happen in other places too. There's a video I saw on Matt Tardio's page from Russia, and take a look at this one. This one's insane. Let's see, transition to that. Watch this. Holy cow. Somebody is apparently getting a little too close to the vodka with their cigarettes or something in Russia. Now, the Iranians finally came out and said, we think this might be a protracted campaign by the Israelis to blow things up, because it's gotten to the point where they just can't deny it anymore. It's so ridiculous to pretend that this is not intentional, because it's only apartments that belong to like high-ranking IRGC officials that happen to be blowing up, or sensitive sites that are making engines for suicide drones or parts for missiles or something like that. So those are the things that are going kablooey, and it's gotten to the point where like they can't deny it anymore. And now the question you have to ask though is, why did they deny it in the first place? That's what surprised me at first, is that why weren't they immediately blaming Israel for everything, whether or not it was Israel? I mean, I would have expected it to be the other way around, right? And the reasoning is because if they blame Israel for doing this, number one, they're admitting that their internal security service is a joke and cannot nail down these, you know, the perpetrators, whoever's doing this. And number two, what is happening, if it's Israel doing it, that's an act of war. That means Israel is still conducting warfare against Iran, and Iran would be hard pressed not to have to respond to that with kinetic force. So they would have to do something. They couldn't just let it stand. They couldn't just let it stand. They have to do something about it. And now, so what does this mean? Well, I think what it means is, number one, Israel never really quit fighting at the end of the 12-day war. They just changed tactics a little bit. And Iran is still reeling from those attacks. The fact that Iran has not managed to, hit back at Israel, and that they're now coming to the world body and they're saying, can you guys get Israel to lay off of us? We never, what they say 2 days ago, the Iranian president came out and said, Iran never, ever wanted to destroy Israel. We've never said that. We've never called for the destruction of Israel. And then you can go back and find like 500 different times when high-ranking officials in the Iranian government were calling for the destruction of Israel. But why are they saying that? Well, they're trying to garner support from the rest of the world to get Israel to stop blowing stuff up in our country. So there's that. Now they just started some new nuclear disarmament talks in Europe, not with the United States, but with European leaders this time. And the very first thing Iran said when they came into these talks was, we're not giving up our nuclear ambitions. We're not going to give up the ability to enrich uranium. So point, period, end of story. Don't even go there. That was their opening gambit in the negotiations, which are literally negotiations about getting Iran to give up its nuclear ambitions. So not off to a real encouraging start there for European Union leaders. Now, the reason they were doing that is because the embargo or the sanctions against Iran, one part of them is about to expire, and these European nations are like, if we let these expire, if you give us a reason to, we'll let them expire, and then you guys can have some of the sanctions lifted under the JCPOA. Well, I think they got their answer. These European leaders are learning the same hard lesson that President Trump is learning, and that is that you cannot reason with unreasonable people. President Trump thought it'd be easy oh, Biden's a houseplant. Obviously, he can't bring peace, but I've got my wits about me, and I'm a good negotiator, so I'll stop all these wars in a day. I'll come in there and I'll stop the war in Ukraine. I'll stop the war in Israel. I'll stop all these wars. And so far, he hasn't managed to stop much of anything. I think he got a ceasefire deal in Congo. Okay, so there's that. We'll give him that one. So President Trump is finding out that global geopolitics are complex and thorny, and you have to really understand what you're doing. Part of the reason that President Trump looks so bad on the world stage when it comes to negotiating peace is because President Trump picked somebody who has absolutely no business whatsoever going around the world trying to negotiate with state actors like Russia and China and Iran. They have no business. This is Steve Witkoff I'm talking about. Steve Witkoff is a real estate developer and a lawyer. He's not a diplomat. And this guy literally has no clue about the complex situations that he's walking into. When he went to Russia and met with Vladimir Putin, Putin just, blathered all of his blatant propaganda in Steve Witkoff's ear. And Witkoff apparently hadn't studied much on the subject because he just was like, really? Okay, wow. And so then the next thing you know, he comes back to the United States and he starts parroting what Vladimir Putin was saying about the war in Ukraine. And of course, Witkoff was completely unsuccessful at that. And worse yet, Witkoff brings that same propaganda back to the White House and whispers it in President Trump's ear. And that's where President Trump is getting his insider knowledge about the war in Ukraine and Russia. So it's no wonder that President Trump has been pretty solidly on the wrong side of that conflict. And now he's only now starting to come around and realize, oh, Vladimir Putin is not a reasonable actor. Vladimir Putin actually doesn't want to stop killing people. He does not want the killing to stop, either his own people or the Ukrainian people. And so really the only way to bring peace in this looks like it's going to be to help Ukraine win. So that's why President Trump yesterday approved another $337 million for Ukraine. I know that really rankles a lot of people in the U.S., a lot of conservatives even, that are just like, they just have been so affected by the massive campaign of propaganda that Russia has put out around the globe on social media, that they believe all the garbage about bioweapons labs and Nazis and all that stupid stuff about Ukraine. That's all complete garbage. It's a complete Russian propaganda. And so now there's a lot of Americans who are getting whiplash. They're like, wait, I supported Trump, and now Trump is supporting Ukraine. He's giving them weapons and selling them weapons and helping them, get what they need to defend themselves and win the war. That's because Trump is finally starting to see the light. That stopping the killing at any cost often is far too costly. It's far too costly, especially for the people who are being victimized. Our job is not to stand up for the strong men. It's not to stand up for the ones who are the aggressors. It's to stand up for the widows and orphans and those who are being oppressed, to free the oppressed. Our job as Christians. And when you ask yourself, who is oppressed in this situation in Russia and Ukraine? The people that are being oppressed are the Ukrainians. And I know there's people that are saying, oh, before the war, Ukraine was oppressing the Russian speakers in Donbass. I spent a week in Donbass 3 days and left 3 days or 1 or 2 days before the war kicked off and went back to Kyiv. I traveled from the length and breadth of the Donbass region, at least the areas that were not already annexed by Russia. And I spoke to a lot of people, and they were all Russian speakers. And I said, do you feel oppressed in Ukraine? Nobody said, well, one drunk guy, one older drunk guy was like, oh, Ukraine doesn't give it, they don't pay our, whatever. And he was blathering on me. He was the only guy that had anything negative to say about Ukraine. Everybody else was like, yeah, we speak Russian, but we are Ukrainian. The reason we speak Russian is because our ancestors spoke Russian. And that's all there is to it. So it's sad to see President Trump getting his information from this really uneducated in terms of global geopolitics guy named Steve Witkoff. Maybe he's a good negotiator when it comes to buying a building in New York, but that doesn't automatically translate to you being a good negotiator when it comes time to talk to a dictator and deliver terms to him that will get him to stand up and take notice. So, somebody says baloney. Are you asking for baloney? What are you trying to say, Mr. Baloney? Uh, so Steve Witkoff just left Doha, Qatar. He got sent over. He's been over to Doha, I don't know, a bunch of times. And he's been trying to negotiate for a ceasefire. I've been saying all along since, for months, I've been saying they're not going to get another ceasefire. It's just not likely. They keep saying, oh, we're going to get 10 more hostages out. And it's one of those things I could tell by the rhetoric, because we've learned to sort of translate whatever President Trump says now and sort of tone down our expectations a little bit. So President Trump says, we're going to get 10 hostages out. That's President Trump trying to frame the argument, trying to make it so by the sheer force of his will. But Hamas doesn't want to do that. They don't want to let the hostages go because that's their only leverage. So they drag their feet and hem and haw and consider the proposals and all that. Meanwhile, they've been very consistent in their messaging. Israel has to leave Gaza. They have to let us get all the food we want brought in our way through us, and Hamas stays in power. That's their criteria for releasing any hostages. And I guarantee you, even if Israel did that, Hamas would not release all of the hostages. They are always, always, always going to keep some of the hostages because they need them as bargaining chips. President Trump finally figured it out today. He said at a press conference, or it wasn't a press conference, he was on his way somewhere and was just talking to the gaggle of reporters and said, Hamas apparently wants to die. Bingo! Hamas wants to die. That's exactly right. You finally got it. So good for you, President Trump. You finally figured that out. I'm glad that you're coming around. And so what President Trump said is, we're going to have to start looking at alternative methods for getting the hostages out. So what are those alternative methods anyway? What's he talking about? there's only one other way, and that is kinetic force. So now I don't know that President Trump is saying we're going to send in Delta Force to go and rescue the hostages, but I think what President Trump was conveying was a message to Bibi Netanyahu, like, pull out all the stops. Go in and do your best to rescue the hostages, because it looks like we're not going to be able to get them out through negotiations. Now, there have been massive protests here in Tel Aviv, in Israel, different places, out here in front of the prime minister's house, just right over that way, in recent days. I mean, they had a rally in Tel Aviv with more than 10,000 people show up, calling for an immediate ceasefire. What they're calling for is, make no mistake, they're not calling for Israel to hold the line and get back all their hostages. They're calling for Israel to stop fighting, leave Gaza, and hope that Hamas will return their hostages. Now, what do you think, if Israel did that, what do you think Hamas would do? There would be massive celebrations in the streets of Gaza. Not just Hamas, but all the Gazans would be celebrating in the streets their great victory over Israel. Now, 75% of Gaza is destroyed at this point, damaged or destroyed. But it doesn't matter. According to the Gaza Health Ministry, 58,000 Gazans have died in the war. That doesn't matter. All that matters is Israel stops killing stops coming after Hamas, and they let all the aid in, and Hamas declares victory. They win. So you have a bunch of left-wing Jews here in Israel who are either not smart enough to understand that if that were to happen, it would be the worst possible thing for Israel, because it means there are going to be more hostages taken. It proves the concept once again to Hamas that taking hostages is the only way to deal with Israel. Or either they're too stupid to understand that, or they're actually complicit. And they hate their country that much that they would like to see their country lose the war. There's not really any third option there, people. So now I thought I had another video here. Oh, and I showed this video on the other live. I'll show you a little bit of it here. This is a staged photo shoot trying to make the world think that everybody's starving in Gaza. But look at these people. Their cheeks are not sunken. These are, young kids. These are some kids. But they're trying to make the point that there's no food in Gaza by filming Gazans getting fed. This is a distribution point where they're feeding people in Gaza. These kids do not look starving. They might look hungry. They might have missed a few meals. That's all the fault of Hamas. These are military age males. Look at this, guys. Now, I don't see a lot of people who are obese here, but I don't see anybody who's just so thin they're about to die. These people look pretty vigorous. Look at all this food. This was shot in Gaza yesterday. Okay? I mean, look, there. Okay, look sad. Look sad. We're filming. Look sad. Come on, this is going out to people. Look like you're, yeah, okay. So I show you that just to help you understand what absolute bunk it is that people are dying in Gaza of hunger. They're not. They're just not. And we saw lots of food in there yesterday. Okay, now I want to move on to Syria because this is where it gets really interesting. There's a website that's available to journalists called the Defense Video Imaging Distribution Site, something like that. And you can go to Divids and download videos that are posted by various different public affairs units across the US military, anywhere around the world. And so, the US military has its own reporters, news people who do photos, videos, and articles. And Divids is where they distribute that content. And most of it is absolutely useless. I'm 90+% of the stuff that shows up on Divids is completely useless. It's, they had a push-up competition at Fort Bragg or something like that. This is not helping us understand how our military is being used around the world. It's shout outs for the Super Bowl or something like that. It's just worthless stuff. But every once in a while, you get a video that gets put up there that is actually really eye-opening. And that's what I found today. I went there and I troll through there once in a while and I just do a search for different areas around the globe, different conflicts to see what's going on. Do we have any new footage from the US in the Red Sea, for example, going after the Houthis or something like that. And today I found something about US troops in Syria. And what got me looking was listening to another video where they were talking about that the United States appears to be sending troops back into Syria to bolster their security presence there. Now, we've never pulled all of our troops out of Syria yet. We had, at the beginning of the year, about 2,000 U.S. troops in Syria. I would say it's down now to somewhere in the hundreds. We've closed at least 6 bases that I know of. They were closing them while I was there in March and April, and moving a lot of military equipment out. They'd move everything out of the base that they had occupied for years in Deir ez-Zor and places like that, and then bomb those bases so that nobody else could go in and use them. So that was interesting to see and kind of disheartening for the um, Kurds who rely on U.S. help for security against ISIS, because ISIS is still a thing. And as a matter of fact, U.S. troops just killed some ISIS soldiers. Let's see if I can find it here. I know where I put it. It's over here. Early this morning, in a place called Al-Bab near Aleppo, Syria, U.S. forces from CENTCOM, Central Command, conducted a raid resulting in the death of a senior ISIS leader, and I'm not even going to try pronouncing his name, and his 2 adult ISIS-affiliated sons were also killed. These ISIS individuals posed a threat to U.S. and coalition forces, as well as the new Syrian government. 3 women and 3 children were also on target, but were unharmed. And General Eric Kurilla put out a statement and said, "We will continue to relentlessly pursue ISIS terrorists wherever they are. ISIS terrorists are not safe where they sleep, where they operate, and where they hide. Alongside our partners and allies, the U.S. Central Command is committed to the enduring defeat of ISIS terrorists that threaten the region, our allies, and our homeland." So now let me read between the lines for you a little bit. This mission was carried out by U.S. Army Rangers in Syria. The U.S. Army Rangers have had a continuous combat presence in Syria for years now, 5, 6, 7 years. The Ranger Regiment rotates a company plus of Rangers through bases in Syria on a constant basis. So maybe once or twice a year, every ranger in the 75th Ranger Regiment does another tour for like 3 months in Syria. Why are they there? They're there because there are still a lot of ISIS affiliated people running around in Syria. And so we're there to keep a lid on those people. We collect intelligence through various methods, human signals, whatever. And then we act on that intelligence to take out any ISIS cells that raise their ugly heads. That is a continuous process, kind of like mowing the grass. Now, so that's no surprise. The fact that we have a small group of Army Rangers, a couple hundred, in Syria doing bad things to bad people, it's what Rangers are for. I was a Ranger, and so I can say that with confidence. It's what you're trained for. That's your job, to go shoot bad people in the face. And what is surprising, however, is what I found today, and that is that there's another group of soldiers in Syria, and guess what they're doing? They are training soldiers from the new Syrian regime under Ahmed al-Sharaa. So look at this video here. This video is, these are soldiers under the new Syrian regime, and on the right side of the screen there are US soldiers from the 10th Mountain Division. And those 10th Mountain soldiers are instructing the soldiers of al-Sharaa's troops how to fight, how to safely conduct raids and ambushes and movement to contact and things like that. They are showing them how to communicate when they're in the field. They're teaching them how to search prisoners, how to take prisoners and search them. They're teaching them how to conduct surveillance, most likely, and probably some first aid, stop the bleed kind of thing in there as well. Now, how do we know that these are al-Sharaa's fighters? Well, I want to fast forward a little bit through this because this goes on for some time. And you can see these guys doing drills here. And what I want you to look carefully at is the patches on their arms. When you see a guy with patches on his arm, now that's an American. No, that's not an American guy. That's a Syrian guy. Some of them don't have any patches, but look at the ones who do have patches. What patch are you seeing? You're going to get a close up here in just a second. Let's fast forward to that. These guys are out here on the range. So this is a live fire drill. This is combat training that Ahmed al-Sharaa's fighters are getting from the United States of America. Now, if this surprises you, and more than that, if it absolutely hacks you off and makes you go like, wait a second, what are we doing training the forces of a terrorist regime that is literally instituting Sharia law across the board in places that they control? I'm still looking for this flag. Oh, right there, that guy's got a, so I took a screenshot right there. Let me back that up. You see this guy, they're just training him on, training them on how to search an enemy soldier. Now this guy's got a black, right there where the guy's hand is, he's got a patch on his arm in Arabic. And so what I did was I ran that picture, a screenshot of that through ChatGPT and said, what is that patch? And it's from the 49th Brigade of the new Syrian army. That's the patch of the new Syrian army. So there's also a shot here, which I might have missed, of a guy standing there with the new Syrian flag on his shoulder. I guess I did miss it. It's back here somewhere. Oh, where did it go? It's somewhere out here. Anyway, suffice it to say, these guys are wearing the 3-starred new Syrian flag. So this was footage that was filmed recently in the last few months. Now, it takes some time before the U.S. military will allow it to come out on divots. So this is probably a couple months old, maybe from April timeframe. But as far back as April, according to this video, there were U.S. infantry forces from the 10th Mountain Division in Syria training al-Sharaz fighters. Now, the question that begs is this: how many of these Syrian fighters were just down in Sweda murdering Druze wholesale? How many of them used the combat tactics that they're being taught here by U.S. forces to go down to the Druze majority areas in southern Syria and commit massacres down there? I don't know that there's any way to know for sure, but there is some chance that happened. So, I don't know. Put in the comments how you feel about this. I've been watching my screen here and haven't been watching the comments, so we've got a bunch. We've got 2,700 people online and only 900 likes. So do me a favor and hit that like button. I know that you need to be reminded. This is me live. Okay, I'm here live at 9 o'clock at night in Jerusalem, asking you to please hit the like button if you like getting information like this. I'm doing a lot of research every day, a lot of reading, and a lot of consumption of, mayhem, so that I can bring you this kind of news. Now, this news has not been reported as far as I can tell. I haven't been able to find where anybody else is reporting that U.S. troops are training al-Sharaz forces. But that is what is clearly shown and is written on the captions for the videos that I pulled down off of divots. So your tax dollars, folks, at work. Now, some people criticize me for being critical of President Trump now and then. I'm a supporter of President Trump. Thank you, PC. I'm a supporter of President Trump. I think he's done a lot of good for a lot of people, and I believe he's the right man for the job of running the United States, running the country. But I think all of us who have supported Trump, who voted for Trump, have at least a few things to look at so far in his new presidency and go, huh? What? He's doing what? And if you don't, I think maybe you're just not being honest about that, or you don't understand geopolitics very well. Now, the United States has apparently given the Kurds, our allies, our best friends in the region, besides Israel, an ultimatum. The United States has given the Kurds an ultimatum and said, you will submit yourselves to the new al-Sharaa regime within, I think, 30 days. And the unspoken threat is, if you don't, the United States is going to withdraw its support for the Kurds. That would be a nightmare scenario. Because the real adversary that we face in Syria is, I mean, ISIS is it's an afterthought. There are thousands of ISIS fighters around Syria, but that's nothing compared to the real threat that we face, and that is the threat from the north, from Turkey. Turkey wants to use the al-Sharaa regime as a proxy force against Israel. Turkey wants to spread its power into Syria and take over more and more of Syria, and the Kurds are standing in their way. And the Turks have troops in Syria right now on the ground battling against the Kurds on an almost daily basis. I saw it with my own eyes when I was there in March. Thank you, Colonel Oz. And the Kurds it's not just the Kurds, it's the Kurds, the Armenian Christians, the Yazidis, the Syriac Christians. There's actually a lot of different faiths represented, the Druze, of course, in Syria. And so abandoning the Kurds means abandoning the Christians, means abandoning everybody to a radical Islamic jihadist caliphate. Look, these are the same people that were wearing ISIS patches back in 2017, 18, 19. And now they're running Syria with the backing of the 8th largest military in the world, Turkey. And their ideology has not changed. They're trying to say that it's changed. They're trying to put forward a much more progressive face. But when again, I talk to people who are living in areas under al-Sharaa's control. And I can promise you, what they are implementing in those areas is Sharia law. And Sharia law doesn't have any room for Kurds or Druze or Christians or Maronites or which are Christians or Yazidis. Doesn't have any room for any of those people. The only thing that it'll do with those people is kill them. So what are we doing? Now, I don't usually encourage you to call your Congress critters, but in this case, I will. In this case, I would say, I'm going to make a short package about U.S. troops training al-Sharaa's forces in Syria. And I'm going to put it up over at chuckholton.com. And I want you to share it with your Congress critter. Just send a link for that package to your congressman and say, were you aware of this? Because I guarantee you they're not. This is not something that the U.S. military really wanted out there, and that's why it's taken since April for the video to actually filter onto the Defense Video Image Distribution site. So Colonel Oz says Trump will abandon the Kurds, Christians, and Yazidis of SDF and their villages again. Yeah, he did back in 2018 as well. I was there when that happened. Erdogan will engage in more land grabs and the religious persecution. Yep, you're absolutely right. I believe that's going to happen as well. Okay, we're at 44, a couple minutes. So now I'm going to go over to the questions and see if I can answer some of your questions. I just got to get the link here. Where's that link? This might help if I can see what I'm doing. Well, hey, moderators, put that link up for me. I'm not seeing it today. I don't know where it went. It just disappeared. Oh, I found it. Okay, there it is. All right. Here's our question and answers. All right. Ann Wilson says, why 3 accidental strikes by Israel on the only Catholic church left standing in Gaza? And why were hundreds of food trucks filled with food blocked from the West, not permitted entry by Israel? And Wilson, both of those statements are factually incorrect. There was one accidental strike on the only Catholic church left standing in Gaza, not three. And the Israelis did an investigation and found out that it was a misfire from an artillery round. And it slightly damaged the church. Unfortunately, shrapnel from that strike killed 3 people, but it was collateral damage. And I was just in Gaza yesterday, and I can tell you with 100% certainty, Israel is not blocking food from entering into Gaza. They will allow as much food into Gaza as anybody wants to bring in. Now, it has to get inspected before it goes in to make sure it doesn't have any weapons in there and stuff, but they are letting as much food in as they could. They have the capacity to process more than 500 trucks a day at the Kerem Shalom crossing alone. And there are currently 1,000 trucks worth of food in Gaza already that are not being distributed, and Israel is not blocking that in any way, shape, or form. Catherine Mayo from the UK, where do all the photos of starving children on British media come from? Well, if you look carefully, they are either, I've seen AI generated images. I've seen images that if you put them into a reverse image search online, you find that they came from another crisis like the earthquake in Turkey or something like that. Or there are children like with cerebral palsy or some medical condition that makes them their muscles waste away, who are being paraded around half naked to show how skinny they are, to make it look like the children are starving to death. So that's the majority of the images that I've seen. Sick children are one thing. And when children are sick, there are children in Gaza that have cancer and they need dialysis and all sorts of other problems. If everybody was starving in Gaza, there would be massive numbers of photos, and we wouldn't need to see, they wouldn't need to use these fake photos to try to convince people that people are hungry. It's not uncommon to see videos coming out of Gaza where people are obese. There's a picture I saw today of a mother sitting next to her child who apparently just died of hunger, and the mother is like 40 pounds overweight. Now, you tell me, if it was your child that was going hungry, would you be overeating to the point where you're 40 pounds overweight while you watch your child starve? Or would you yourself starve first? I can tell you what my wife would choose. My wife would be, she would die of starvation before any of my kids died of starvation. I promise you that. So to see a overweight, not actually obese Palestinian woman sitting next to this baby and oh, the baby just died of hunger, just doesn't pass the smell test. And there are so many instances of what they call Bollywood, you know, the Palestinians faking stuff like that have come out throughout this war. I don't think you can believe anything that comes out of Gaza. Grandpa Wood Doggy says, did they get back the American hostages? Are the hostages okay? All of the living American hostages are out of Gaza now. There are some that are dead, but all the living ones are out. Lord Peanut II says, what makes people be like that? How many of the 1.8 billion are like that? And can we somehow become like that? And why are so many right-wing people like Tucker also supporting them? I'm not sure what you're talking about with 1.8 billion people. There's no context to that question, so I'm sorry. It must have been asked about something I said several minutes ago, and I don't remember what we were talking about. Eleanor says, can we hear from GHF directly? Can we see proof of the NGOs refusing to distribute food? Not just your words, please. Well, how do you show proof? I guess the proof is that the food is sitting out there in the sun, rotting and not being distributed. The proof is that the UN itself is saying that they will not cooperate very publicly, that they will not cooperate with GHF. And we do hear from GHF on a daily basis. If you can follow them on X, and you can get reports from the GHF of what they're doing every day. So again, I went into Gaza yesterday. I saw it with my own eyes. There were a couple of UN SUVs that were at that distribution, not distribution, but that supply depot, but not the trucks that would be needed to distribute that food. Apparently, because we were there, and my picture is all over social media today. You can't tell it's me because that's from behind, but you can. I'm the one right in the center with the TV on my helmet of that picture of all the journalists going to see the food site in Gaza. Apparently, that has shaken something loose with the United Nations. It's shown that they were literally choosing to let people starve rather than work with the IDF. And so they're in talks now to perhaps start using the IDF to safeguard their routes into their distribution sites. But I haven't heard what came of that yet. Lord Peanut II said, why are the mainstream media news channels playing along with them? They must know the truth. Well, the mainstream media has an agenda, and that agenda is anti-Israel. End of story. If you say so, asks, why don't the Arab nations send representatives to distribute the food that is sent into Gaza? Bigger question is, why aren't the Arab nations sending massive amounts of food? Now, I will report, this just came out right before I went live, that the United Arab Emirates has received permission from Israel to airdrop food into Gaza. So apparently the UAE is going to be doing another one of these airdrops, which is a drop in the bucket. You can't deliver enough quantity of food to, that way to make much of a difference. It's really performative. It's a political stunt to do that. And it kills people in Gaza. It's a death trap for people that are down there going, oh, big pallet of food, and just squashes them. And lots of people have died that way. So I guess there's an Arab nation that's trying to distribute their food themselves by airdropping it in. Why they can't just bring truckloads of it in and go distribute it? Well, I know why, because it'll get looted and their trucks will get wrecked. But if they worked with the IDF would give them secure places to distribute it. KP1 says, how much longer will you be in Israel? I leave Tuesday morning. Sheba Rabataba Shaha says, who will be the likely successor of Khamenei if the regime is still in power? He has designated successors, but I haven't kept up. I don't know if they've announced who they are yet. Dave Mulkey, how's it going, man? That's my cousin. Any new information on what was in the Chinese cargo planes is around rebuilding their air defenses? No and yes. So no, we don't have any new information on what was in the Chinese cargo planes. Yes, Iran is rebuilding their air defenses. It doesn't matter because if Israel strikes again, they'll just wipe out all their air defenses again. Those air defenses are useless against F-35s and B-2s, of course, as well. How much air defense has Iran received from China? We don't know exactly. China says they haven't given them any, but I think that's false. Robert H. says, is it true Thailand has declared an invasion? Yes, it is true. I may end up going to Thailand in the near future if this keeps popping off. As a matter of fact, I got a message while we've been on this live asking about whether I could go to Thailand. So I may go sooner rather than later. Daniel says, do you think China is behind what's happening between Thailand and Cambodia? No, I think this is an ongoing historic problem where they're disputing a certain area along their border where there's a temple that everybody wants to go to. And the International Court of Justice ruled like years ago that that land actually did belong to Cambodia, but Thailand has never accepted that. Both sides they've had skirmishes there before, and this one is just getting a little more out of hand. Daniel, no, okay, so Lori says, do you think other countries should help America help Ukraine, like Europe? Of course, I think Europe should continue to carry the bulk of the burden in terms of percentage of their GDP or percentage of their military budget, or even in actual dollars. Europe has now given more money to Ukraine than the United States. I know President Trump disputes that, but that's the truth as far as I know. The Funky Monkey says, do you think high-ranking IRGC live in buildings bombed or owned by the regime? Yes, I do. Patricia M. Truth Seeker says, who would be a good substitute for Witkoff? Ted Cruz would be a good substitute. Let's see. Marco Rubio would be much, much better. And he's been really sidelined in this administration. You can see Marco Rubio, it physically hurts him when he has to go parrot the line that's been given to him by the Trump administration. And he knows that it's just bunk. Like when he went to Panama and President Trump was saying they were going to retake the Panama Canal and all that stuff. And they were asking Rubio, is the U.S. really going to retake the Panama Canal? And Rubio's like, hemming and hawing and trying not to answer the question because to answer the question would get him fired. Hilda Well says, do you know if any hostages are still alive? They say that 20 of them are still alive, and maybe 19 because there's one that they've lost contact with. EJ says, Ukraine's the money laundering capital of the world. EJ, you read that on the internet. And believe it or not, everything you read on the internet is not true. Now, I've done deep dives in the 7 or 8 months I've spent in Ukraine during this war into where the aid money goes that's given to Ukraine, both military and humanitarian. And I found in my investigation that aid is going to the places where it's meant to go. They're not stealing it. They are trying to survive as a country. And Russia has put out during the entire war that Ukraine is the money laundering capital of the world. They are not. I could do a whole podcast on who is the money laundering capital of the world, but that's for another time. But it's not Ukraine. I'm not saying there's no corruption, but I am saying that they are addressing the corruption, and I've seen them do it. I've watched them root out corruption within their ranks and prosecute those people. So believe it or not, they just want to survive. They just want to keep being Ukraine. I don't know why that's so hard to understand. Why is that so hard to believe? Their neighbor is trying to take over their country and subsume it and make it a part of Russia. And they don't want to be part of Russia. Why is that so hard to understand? They are fighting for their very survival. Point, period, end of story. Andrea Volcana says, would it be possible that the Mossad rescue more hostages, if not all? So to finish the nonsense negotiations with it, if it were possible, they would do it. And if it becomes possible, if they get, uh, you know, information that would lead them to being able to rescue the hostages, they will rescue the hostages. It wouldn't be the Mossad, it would be the special forces that did it, but that's neither here nor there. His Majesty says, does Israel face so much political opposition that they're not able to take multiple offensives? No, they are ramping up the offensives as we speak, increasing the pressure on Hamas across the board. Cour de Rose says, I saw reports of a Syrian pastor killed with 13 members of his family. No, it was 20 members of his family. This was a former Druze guy who had converted to Christianity, opened an evangelical church in Asweda, and he and his entire family, Pastor Khaled was his name, was massacred. I'm talking his wife, his children, his mother and his father, his sisters and brothers, and their children were all killed. His Majesty says, are the Rangers supported by the IDF? No, we don't have Rangers in Israel. We don't have Rangers in Gaza. We have Rangers in Syria, and those Rangers are not being directly supported by the IDF, as far as I know. They don't really need it. They don't need to be supported by the IDF. Barbie says, is it plausible that Iran Hamas would take other hostages to replace deceased ones and strengthen their negotiation position? They have tried. They've tried to take more hostages, specifically IDF troops, a couple times, and they've failed, thank God, so far at that. Question, does anyone at the White House or Pentagon briefings ask about this training? Why won't the U.S. maintain its support of the Kurds? Nobody, as far as I know, has asked about this, but I'm going to break this story, and you're going to hear more about this story around that, and you're going to know you heard it first right here, okay? Why doesn't the U.S. maintain its support of the Kurds? Because the current U.S. administration does not understand the politics of the region. They do not understand the situation on the ground. If they did, we would be 100% behind the Kurds. Now, we are still supporting the Kurds because we have troops in the Rojava in the eastern part of Syria, but not to the extent that we should be. Debbie says, I'm very angry to hear the USA is training these horrible leaders, soldiers. What can we do? We can contact our Congress critters, and I'll put together an article and I'll put together a video, and you can send them the link to one or both. But I would recommend you do that. Who will guard the ISIS camp if we betray the Kurds? Nobody, Kamal. Nobody will. The ISIS camp will be opened and the ISIS people inside will leave, and they will just go start doing their ISIS things once again across Syria. They are allies of the new Shura regime. There's no reason for that regime to keep them in prison. Kemal also asks, who greenlit the Turkish jihadist invasion of Afrin and Rojava with a cowardly Sunday press release with Congress out of town? Who called Erdogan one of his best friends and equated him with Bibi? President Trump did. That's right. Nicole Angel says, how do we know that Israel's not setting up the food being given out for the press to see? As you say, the people in Gaza with pots are set up pictures. Okay, well, fair question. And I will say that all the pallets that we saw were marked with the entity that sent them, that they belong to. So there were pallets that belonged to World Central Kitchen, there were pallets that belonged to the UN, there were pallets that belonged to other NGOs, and there were pallets that belonged to GHF. So that's one way. I don't think the IDF would stage 1,000 truckloads. We're talking about like 100 acres of food out in the desert in a place where, I mean, you could see trucks coming and going. There were trucks loading up and taking the GHF food into the GHF distributions. So, and we know that site has been used as a supply depot for 10 years or more. The Palestinians who work there loading the trucks and stuff have been working there for a decade. It's a very, very sought after job working at that place. Pearl Boyson says, when you showed that video of the U.S. troops training terrorists, my first thought was, how can that happen? No doubt they use that training on the Druze, and the training will be used against others as well. Yeah, for sure. USA Soldier for Christ says, when will your Red Team book be available on Locals for subscribers? It already is, actually. We've just put it out as a serialized set of articles. So you can go find that stuff if you're a supporter on Locals now. Now, as a full manuscript, as a full book, it will not be released to supporters on Locals because I'm going through an actual publisher with that book, and that publisher doesn't want me obviously giving up on a bunch of sales by giving it out to my supporters. So there's that. Sharon Whiteley says, why hasn't Trump done anything about the Houthis sinking 2 cargo ships with loss of life? Well, they weren't American ships, and so I guess that's why. What happened to the exit corridor through Israel? So no, the corridor was, they were going to allow people from Gaza to leave Gaza through Israel if they can get a place for them to go. Some already have left through Israel. And people, like, if they were dual citizens, if they had citizenship, let's say in Spain or something like that, as well as being Palestinians, and they were in Gaza, they have been allowed to leave through Israel and go to Jordan and then fly out from there and go to wherever they're going. What Israel's trying to do is get Ethiopia or Libya or Indonesia or someplace like that to agree to take tens of thousands of, or maybe hundreds of thousands of Gazans. France agreed to take them. And so Israel's just trying to coordinate how to do that. How do you vet the people? And that's why they're setting up this, they're calling it a humanitarian city down in the south in Rafah, near where I was yesterday. So they're working on it, is what I'm saying. Jane Jan says, everything is expensive in Gaza. How can people afford it? Where do they get the money? Well, a lot of what you're seeing in Gaza is barter at this point, but Iran just sent $100 million to the Hamas organization. That $100 million is going to get paid out to their soldiers. And then their soldiers go buy things. And then the people they bought things from can buy things. And then those people can buy things. You know, you see how that works. So they just got $100 million injected into their economy in the last couple of months. His Majesty said, is Skynet, I think he means Starlink, available in Gaza? No, it's not. Mimi says, what will it take for the world to recognize that Israel is really trying to feed Gazans and not committing genocide? Well, hopefully it takes a bunch of journalists like me telling the story and being allowed to show the people what's actually happening. I'm in discussions with the IDF right now to go back into Gaza and do a more extensive embed that would allow me to show you more of what's going on inside Gaza. And we'll see if that comes to fruition or not. Konkatz says, is Ambassador Barak acting according to the Trump administration? Yes, he's acting at the behest of the Trump administration. Susan Mack says, why are the Ukrainians protesting a takeover of anti-corruption unit? I haven't read into that a whole lot. I've just been too busy here. But there are a lot of Ukrainians that are upset with what that decision to, I think, consolidate some of the anti-corruption stuff that was going on in the Ukrainian government. I need to read into that some more and give you a better answer, but I just haven't had a chance. Jane Smith says, you've often discussed how UN equals Hamas and the UN's corruption. Do you have specific recommendations for President Trump to fight the UN? You say we should stay in. Yes, I do. And we should stop. President Trump's doing it. Stop supporting UN agencies that are harming the United States, that are acting contrary to our national security goals. And one that he could defund right away would be the IOM, the International Organization for Migration, which, as far as I know, has not been defunded yet. But we need to be much more judicious about what we fund and what we don't fund. And we could use the threat of reducing our contributions to the UN overall, because we contribute almost a third of the UN's budget. So we could say, you know what, we're going to cut back by half what we give to the UN. That's not going to affect our ability to veto things that the UN wants to do, or, you know, whatever. It would just make it harder for the UN to do stupid things around the world. Arnold Floyd, have you talked about Cambodia and Thailand? Yeah, a little bit. I'll talk more about it later. Pamela Trost says, what's Israel's response to the U.S. demanding the Kurds submit to the new Syrian regime? Well, Israel just sat down with the new Syrian regime yesterday in Europe somewhere, maybe Turkey. Yeah, in Turkey, I think. And came to an agreement with the new Syrian regime to demilitarize everything south of Damascus. And so apparently Israel is on board, which is unfortunate. Rain says, do you think it'll be safe for my son to go on vacation in Thailand at the end of August? Yes, I think it will be safe, because he's not going to be going to the areas where the fighting is. And every place else in Thailand is very, 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 very safe. Thailand's a great place to go. Question, where will all the people in Gaza live? Well, I'm not sure what you mean by that, but they will live in Gaza, or they'll go somewhere else. Priscilla asks, I have a question no one answers in comments, semi-related to royal family. Do they technically have power to take over running their land and take back their Christian control? What country are you talking about? Ukraine or Syria? I think you're probably talking about Syria. There are places, if the Kurds were allowed to keep Rojava, and that's what the United States ought to do, is say to Syria, okay, the new Syrian regime, if you want to run the rest of Syria, that's fine, but everything to the east of the Euphrates River belongs to the Kurds, and that will now be the Kurdish nation. It will be called Kurdistan, and the Kurds will finally have their own country. That would be the right thing to do here. And if that happened, then the areas in Rojava that are primarily Christian, there's only one valley, it's the Khabur River Valley, that has a bunch of Christian villages in it, would perhaps have some autonomy under the new Kurdish regime. So that would be the best answer there. Okay. All right. That's all the questions we've got tonight, folks. We're only a little over time today, so thank you very much for being a part of it. Oscar did go back to Mexico. I haven't talked to him since he got back. I need to call him and see how he's doing. But thank you all for being a part of the Hot Zone. Thank you to our new members that have subscribed even during this live. I appreciate all of you. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, why not? You should be. And so I would recommend that you get signed up and become subscribers here on YouTube, or go over to chuckholton.com and become a subscriber over there. Okay. So 93% of the last poll decided that I am not a bot. I'm not sure who did that poll, but okay. There was another poll that was taken earlier as to where I ought to go next, and that may be changing out by the hour. So I got to make a few phone calls when I get off this live. So thank you very much for watching again, and we will